Hi, so my name is Andrew Campbell, and my paper is the case for game-based learning, arguments in favor of widespread implementation of GBL, as is called in shorthand, in the modern classroom. So let's get started. So my motivation for studying game-based learning is, well, number one, clearly we live in a technology-driven world. I'm a fairly young guy, but I'm still a digital native. I grew up with AOL. Our kids are growing up with 5 screens, near their face at all times. Therefore, technology and games are absolutely necessary if we're going to engage them in learning. And to me, in my personal pedagogy, learning is an acquired skill and thought process which you have to attain in order to be effective in a variety of situations. And in my opinion, games are an incredibly effective way to learn those skills and practice those thought processes. Practice those, and then eventually use those in real life in order to apply knowledge. In my short time in education, I've found that it can be a bit resistant to change, which is understandable. Teachers have a lot to do, so much to do, that when you find something that works and you're still staying, at school till 6:30, 7 o'clock, you'll tend to use that over and over in order because you know it is effective. I feel that my position as a relatively new educator gives me the perspective to try and implement the latest and greatest, and GBL, I think, is something that is late and great, new and great. However, it is founded in solid principles, which is why I believe it matters. So the thesis or main idea of my paper is that the effectiveness of GBL warrants a commitment to its integration at the administrative as well as classroom levels due to the sound theoretical basis of GBL, compelling research confirming the effectiveness of GBL at facilitating learning, and the compatibility of GBL in a student-centered learning environment. So I'm arguing that GBL is a really good thing that we absolutely need in our classrooms. So the main arguments and kind of the literature that I use to back up my main arguments are as follows. Number one is that GBL is based on sound principles that we have as a class actually read a lot about, especially earlier in the semester. Wu points out in his article that Keller's MVP, or the motivation, volition, performance model, does a lot to shed light on the importance of learning motivation and cognitive load, something that I think that games do incredibly well. That's something that I argue in my paper. Games do that incredibly well. They don't put too much on us. If we do, we get frustrated, go back. But we'll get a little bit more into that later. I think that kind of leads into the proximal zone of development, something else that's pretty standard in education literature. Vygotsky talks about needing that challenge. We need that challenge to keep us really focused in, but we need to be able to reach that challenge in order to grow. Games, with their built-in scaffolding, I argue, are really good at doing this. Therefore, it's a principle of education that GBL uses really effectively. And GBL also uses flow. Of course, I'm going to butcher Zizigsintimali. I just call him Mr. C personally. Flow, the concept that when we are just challenged enough and are truly interested in a task or in some material, we enter into almost a sort of blissful state where nothing exists outside of that task. Games really reach to pull kids into flow, and I think that is one of the reasons that they can be so effective, and we really need to study and look into getting them into our classrooms more and more. Wong also argues that the setup or the structure of many GBL games, some of the more effective GBL games, do a great job of mimicking the problem-solving process in the way the games are set up. You know, you see a problem, you make an attempt. If you don't solve that problem with that attempt, then you go back, attempt again, and find the solution, and this is repeated. So this is another thing that we think of, okay, this is how we've always thought, this is a good way to learn. Well, Long argues that GBL kind of mimics that problem-solving format that is tried and true. So moving on to the evidence that I saw in the literature that supported GBL's effectiveness, Admiral and Jabbar, in their study of, it was a case study of a couple hundred of students in the Netherlands. They were given several tasks to accomplish. They had cell phones and GPS trackers. They actually were implanted in the city of Amsterdam, and they were quote-unquote transported back to medieval Amsterdam. They had to go around, complete challenges, discover new information, new material, answer questions, and what Amral and Jabbar found out was that this did a really good job of cutting back on undesirable behaviors and engaged kids, which I think is really the point. James and his team studied the effectiveness of a narrative-based game called Crystal Island, in which a student or the learner plays someone who is transplanted upon a deserted island. The residents of this island are falling sick from a disease, and the goal is to find out what's causing the people to get sick, so the learner has to go and find evidence. They have to conduct experiments, speak to citizens, they have to make choices, they have to take risks. In the process, they learn. James points out that he thought this was particularly effective, and that the alignment that Crystal Island used with North Carolina's science curriculum for 8th grade was particularly noteworthy. There's more evidence in studies found by Booker and Tuzin where they compared the effectiveness of a GBL curriculum versus a conventional curriculum. In both cases, they found that students learned better when they're using games, using game-based learning, than when they sat there and listened to a teacher speak to them. Finally, GBL is well suited for the student-centered environment. That's kind of my last argument. You know, we need to get this into our classrooms. You know, partly because the issue of time. So Marx will point out that student-centered environments mean that we take the needs and interests and strengths of our students, and that's what a student-centered classroom is. Well, we can't really have those kind of environments if we do not have the time in order to implement these sorts of things. So, and then include more GBL into the curriculum. Therefore, what McLean found in his study of some flipped classrooms, and I'm a big fan of the flipped model. Flipped classrooms saved time, and time is what we need for GBL, and GBL really allows kids to engage with the games and with their teachers and with the material. Witten gives a number of arguments for why financially GBL makes sense and what we can do to make it sense. And so GBL is what it fits in what we're trying to do in education today. It can be supported, and it's based on sound principles. That's why I'm a big fan of it. So in conclusion, and kind of what I've learned in the process of writing this paper is that I think engagement is really vital if you want to facilitate learning. That's kind of my personal pedagogy, and the research that I've done on GBL really backs this. In particular, in the case studies for my second argument that I read, when they showed higher engagement. Post-test scores seemed to always be better. Where energy goes, attention flows is a popular catchphrase used by some, and I think that research backs this. I also learned that measuring engagement subjectively is a really tough thing to do. The methods that we use to engage measure engagement are really complex and convoluted. And even still, the authors and the researchers have to insert that caveat. This is really, really hard thing to prove, to say definitively that, yeah, okay, this we know ensures focus, engagement, learning. I also learned that GBL, it kind of reaffirmed my suspicion that GBL is really promising. I believe that this really could be worth it, though I understand some of the barriers. And in my final point, when it comes to graduate level research papers, it seems that the more you read, the more you work with and mold your own thesis, the more you realize that specificity is key. When I just thought that GBL was good, I started to see that okay, that's too broad, that's not good enough. So in the future, I think with all research based papers, specificity is going to be a key for me, and I think it could be a key for really anybody. So thanks for listening to my presentation. I hope that you'd like to give my paper a read, and I hope y'all have a good night.